Hey, it's Mike Brennan. We're doing a special edition of our 420 Post because we got some great news out there for cannabis lovers. Today, the House of Representatives passed the MORE Act. Can I get a yay there, Rick?
Yay!
Okay, that's Rick Thompson, who's a longtime advocate of cannabis here in Michigan, been instrumental in not only the medical marijuana space but the adult use space, and he's also a member of the cannabis caucus with the Democrat Party. So, why don't you talk a little bit about what this all means?
Well, I could have done a more enthusiastic yay, but I don't feel more enthusiastic about the MORE Act. This is a historic moment, let's be certain. This is the biggest marijuana bill that's ever received a vote in the United States Congress, and it received a yes vote. That's huge. But there's some reservations too. First of all, this year we don't believe it will come up for a vote in the Senate. The Senate Republicans have locked this down for quite some time and have refused to discuss it. In fact, the Senate version of the MORE Act, which was sponsored by now Vice President Kamala Harris, has been in existence for a long time there and has never even gotten a committee hearing yet. So it's unlikely the Senate will take this up. But important for a few things. First of all, it would completely deschedule cannabis, completely remove it from the list of controlled substances. That's the desired output most advocates want. We'd rather not see it descheduled. Secondly, it would add a 5% sales tax to cannabis nationwide to provide for federal programs regarding cannabis and other things. That's not so good. But as we see, government oftentimes doesn't do anything unless there's a price tag attached to it. Here's the real concern, though. In 2021, with a Joe Biden administration, it's possible that something like the MORE Act would come back up again. But Mr. Biden isn't interested in things like decriminalizing cannabis or, just a small little 5% sales tax. According to a CNN story published just this morning, here's what Joe Biden's campaign spokesman said. His name is Andrew Bates. He said Biden seeks to make it easier to conduct research on marijuana's positive and negative health impacts by rescheduling it as a Schedule II drug. So there's a big difference between dropping from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2 and going from Schedule 1 to Schedule None. Schedule 2 is viewed by most of us in the world as a trap. It's an allowance for pharmaceutical industries to monopolize cannabis and still remain criminally liable on a personal level. Also, if you don't deschedule cannabis, you can't have interstate transfer of cannabis. You can't have people safely transporting from Michigan to Illinois, for example, for personal use or for corporate cooperation. So the MORE Act represents our best case scenario, minus the 5% sales tax. But it's unlikely to get any vote this year in the Senate rather, and next year its future is rather tentative considering the Biden position on the subject.
So, do you think with Kamala Harris as the vice president-elect, soon to be the vice president, that he could change his mind? She could persuade him to go in a slightly different direction?
Absolutely, I do. I think too that the president signs bills that come to him from Congress. If Congress wants to pass a version of the MORE Act next year in both the House and the Senate, which we could do if we get those 2 seats in Georgia, if they do that, I think it would be very difficult for Joe Biden to not sign a bill that expunges records and creates a national program. I think it would be very politically unwise for him to reject that. So in that instance, all control would be back in the hands of the Congress, which is where it always has rested. But the most important things are we're seeing federal government moving on cannabis law reform issues, even in several different ways. This is a federal government that's refused to budge at all, not even a whisker, for decades, including even just earlier this year when the DEA rejected petitions that were submitted to reschedule cannabis. So these are conversations being had on a level we've never seen before. 2021 and 2022 could be a pair of very dynamic years when it comes to cannabis law reform. I say 2021 and 2022 because that's when the next big election comes up in 2 years. And oftentimes cannabis law reform is one of those issues that is very popular among the people, but doesn't get a whole lot of time in the halls of lawmaking until we get close to an election.
Now,
I
I
wish it
know,
were not that way, but that's just my observation.
sure. I know you've seen a lot of the poll numbers. While we talk about that, I know nationwide it's pretty popular idea. I think it's well over the majority, right?
68% in a most recent Gallup poll, 68% said that they favored cannabis legalization, not descheduling from 1 to 2, but full legalization in the way that the MORE Act is describing. That's a huge percentage. It's 86% of Democrats, only about 48% of Republicans. But you can see how nationally these numbers are pretty impressive. We've been saying this for a long time, that the candidate that embraces cannabis law reform is the candidate that can cross over party lines, and they can recruit votes, even if their other policy choices would have necessarily not gotten them people.
And certainly the Democrats, with only 6-seat edge in the House, and coming up at the midterms, where traditionally the party in power loses seats, this might be something for them to really latch onto and get behind. Then you think?
I do think, and especially since on this particular vote, we saw 6 Republicans side with the Democrats, but saw 5 Democrats side with the Republicans and say no to the MORE Act. So, although the majority of Democrats voted yes, it's certainly not a 100%. And I think that when you start whipping votes in the Congress, you're looking for 100% participation from your party. And based on the nature of the proposal, I don't think we have 100% participation from Democrats. So it will have to be bipartisan if it's going to have success in the Senate. There's no question about it. But the bipartisanship is even more forced next year in the House than it was this past.
So at least a good first step, then, right, Rick?
Absolutely. Anytime we're seeing federal agencies actually saying, let's take a look at this cannabis thing. Maybe you guys have been talking something smart for the last few years. Anytime we see that, it's a positive. Although this particular effort may not necessarily go as far as we need it to go, or it may not necessarily cross the goal line and become a law, oftentimes it takes 2 or 3 times before a bill actually becomes a law. And if this is the first introduction, hopefully we'll get it next time around.
All right. Well, let's all keep our fingers crossed. And thanks for joining us. We're going to be doing more of these breaking news updates as we move forward into 2021, which I think is going to be a big year for cannabis, not only in Michigan, but across the country. So, Rick and I want to say thanks for joining us today. And don't forget, on Wednesdays from 1 till 2 o'clock, we do 420 Post. And next Wednesday, we're going to have Andrew Brisboe on, who is the director of the Marijuana Regulatory Agency. And we can ask him about this very issue. Right, Rick?
You bet.
All right. Thanks very much. And we'll hopefully see you all on Wednesday.